On the evening of March the 31st, 1922, a small Bavarian farm about 43 miles north of Munich, Germany. That night marked the beginning of the end for those living on the farm. 6 people were brutally murdered by an unknown assailant. The victims were Andreas Gruber, his wife Cäzilia Gruber, their widowed daughter Viktoria Gabriel, Viktoria's children Cäzilia, Josef, and their maid Maria Baumgartner. The victims were savagely killed with a pickaxe, known as a grub axe. However, as horrifying as the murders were, there was an even more chilling detail. The perpetrator or perpetrators had lived with the victims' bodies for 3 days. During this time, the food in the house was eaten, the farm animals were fed, and the fireplace was lit. 4 of the victims were found stacked on top of each other in the barn. This gruesome massacre is considered one of the most horrific and unsolved crimes in German history. Before the incident, the family had reported hearing strange noises from the attic, which caused their former maid to leave. However, for the new maid, Maria Baumgartner, the situation was different. 2 days after she started working, she encountered this horrific event. To this day, these murders remain unsolved, leaving behind countless questions and deep fear. In this documentary, we will delve into the horrific and dark details of the Hinterkaifeck murders to uncover the secrets behind this unsolved mystery. Who was the killer or killers? Why did they continue to live with the bodies of their victims for 3 days? Join me on this terrifying journey and once again confront the dark side of truth. Shortly before the attack, strange events began to occur around Hinterkaifeck and its surroundings. 6 months earlier, the family's maid had suddenly quit her job one night. She claimed the reason was the strange noises coming from the attic and that the house was haunted. In March 1922, Andreas Gruber found a newspaper on the farm property. He did not remember buying that newspaper. Initially, he thought the postman had mistakenly left it there, but something was not right because no one in that area subscribed to that newspaper. Just a few days before the murders, Andreas Gruber told his neighbors that he had seen footprints leading from the forest to the farm's machine room. The door of the machine room had been broken into. This alone might not have been disturbing, but what alarmed him was that the footprints did not leave the farm again. At the same time, some of the family's keys had gone missing. And one night, they heard sounds from the attic. Gruber searched the building multiple times but found no one. However, these sounds were not just an echo in the dark night. The progression of events deepened the fear within everyone. Gruber had told a few people about what he saw but refused help, and he did not report this situation to the police. The 7-year-old Cäzilia Gabriel's schoolmate made a fearful confession, stating that Viktoria Gabriel had run away from the farm after a heated argument the night before the incident and was only found hours later in the forest. What remained was darkness and uncertainty. On the afternoon of March 31st, 1922, the new maid, Maria Baumgartner, arrived at the Hinterkaifeck farm with her sister. Her sister left shortly after, but Maria was the last person to see the family alive before these horrific events. That evening, Cäzilia, Andreas, Viktoria Gabriel, and her daughter were lured into the barn from which they would never emerge. That night, a brutality began in the darkness. The unknown perpetrators used a pickaxe belonging to the farm owners to kill Cäzilia, Andreas, Viktoria, and Viktoria's young daughter. The same weapon was used mercilessly to kill little Josef, who was sleeping peacefully in his crib, and the maid Maria Baumgartner. After the murders, for 4 days, no one discovered the bodies. On April 1st, coffee vendors Hans and Eduard Sharovsky came to Hinterkaifeck. They knocked on the door, but no one answered. They wandered around the yard but saw no one, only noticing that the door to the machine room was open. The family had not attended school or Sunday service, which raised suspicions. On April 3rd, the postman, Josef Meyer, noticed that the mail from April 1st was still in the same place. However, the most terrifying discovery was made on April 4th. Albert Hoffner came to the farm to repair the food chopper's motor, but he saw no one inside. Only the sounds of the farm animals and the dog could be heard in the barn. After finding no signs of life for an hour, Hoffner completed his work and left. The events kept growing. The next day, on April 5th, the village guide, Lorenz Schlittenbauer, with his son Johann and stepson Josef, went to check on the farm. Upon entering the barn, they were confronted with a horrifying scene. They found the lifeless bodies of Cäzilia, Andreas, Viktoria Gabriel, and her daughter. Shortly after, the maid Maria Baumgartner and the youngest family member Josef were also found dead in the house. The gruesome murders at Hinterkaifeck remain an unsolved mystery to this day. An entire family was brutally murdered by an unknown killer. One day, after the discovery of the murders, Inspector Georg Reingruber and his colleagues began to conduct research to unravel the mystery behind the killings. Upon entering the barn where the bodies were found, the extent of the incident was revealed in a horrific manner. Judge Johann Baptist Aumüller came to the barn to perform autopsies. No weapon was found at the scene, but it was believed that a pickaxe was the most likely murder weapon. Evidence emerged suggesting that young Cäzilia was killed last. The victims' skulls were removed and sent to Munich. However, the skulls were never found. They were last seen in a courthouse in Augsburg and were lost during Allied bombings in World War II. On April 8, 1922, the victims were buried in the Weidhofen cemetery. But all that remained were questions and a horrifying uncertainty. Initially, the police suspected that the incident might have been a robbery. Craftsmen from surrounding villages, vagrants, and several individuals were interrogated. A large amount of money was found in the house, yet it had not been touched, leading to the collapse of the robbery theory. It was understood that the perpetrators had stayed on the farm for several days, fed the cattle, and it was discovered that they had cut meat from the pantry. Neighbors had reported smoke coming from the chimney throughout the week. The police did not know the true motive behind the attack, but began to conduct research. Numerous arrests were made, but no suspect was found. The case was closed in 1955. However, the last interrogations were conducted in 1986, before Konrad Müller retired. Over the years, more than 100 suspects were questioned, but no investigation reached a definitive conclusion. This horrific event continues to remain unsolved mystery. Behind the murders committed at the Hinterkaifeck farm lies a mystery still waiting to be solved. According to court records, it was stated that the victims went to the barn due to sounds coming from there and were likely attacked there. However, no reasonable explanation was found for why 4 members of the family went to the barn at the same time. Only 5 photographs were taken of the crime scene: the bodies in the barn, the body of the maid, Maria Baumgartner, the destroyed crib of Josef in Victoria's bedroom, and the view of the yard from outside. No fingerprints were found. The evidence indicated that Viktoria Gabriel was the first victim, followed by the elderly Cäzilia Gruber, Andreas Gruber, and finally Cäzilia Gabriel. It was thought that Maria Baumgartner and Josef were killed afterward. The idea that the killer might have been hiding on the farm was based on stories Andreas Gruber told his neighbors. The shifted roof tiles and cavities supported this theory. However, it was confusing that Gruber had not noticed these irregularities. The night before the murders, the tradesman Michael Plockel passed by the farm and noticed the fireplace was lit and that someone was inside. This person shone a lantern into Plockel's eyes, forcing him to flee. He also noted that the smoke from the chimney had a bad smell. However, this statement was not taken into account, and what was burned in the fireplace was not investigated. On the morning of April 1st at 3 a.m., butcher Simon Reislander saw two strangers at the edge of the forest. The strangers turned their backs to hide their faces. When he heard about the murders, he thought these individuals might have been involved. Plumber Albert Hoffner did several hours of repair work at the farm after the murders. The house doors were locked. He encountered no one, but he heard the dogs barking. When he finished his work, he noticed the barn door was open. When the bodies were found, the dogs were in the barn, and the barn door was closed. In May 1927, a stranger was stopped late at night in Weidhofen village. Instead of answering questions, he claimed to be the Hinterkaifeck killer and fled into the forest. His identity was never determined. The Hinterkaifeck murders still linger in minds with unanswered questions and a dark uncertainty. In that cold March of 1922, a savage massacre took place. However, the mystery behind these murders remains unsolved. The question of who killed the family has sparked debates for years, and at the center of these debates has always been Viktoria Gabriel's husband, Carl Gabriel. Carl Gabriel was reported to have died in combat in Arras, France, during the First World War. But there was a problem. His body was never found. After his supposed death, Viktoria Gabriel gave birth to a child named Josef. Rumors in the village suggested that Josef was the result of an incestuous relationship between Viktoria and her father, Andreas. However, the truly terrifying theory was that Carl Gabriel had not died and had slaughtered his family for revenge. Although soldiers from Carl's regiment claimed to have witnessed his death, this assertion did not dispel everyone's doubts. Those who believed Carl had survived the war claimed he had gone to Russia and established a new life there. After World War II, some prisoners of war released by the Soviets alleged that a Bavarian-born Soviet officer was the Hinterkaifeck killer. One of these prisoners stated he could not forget the officer's facial expression and manner of speaking. According to him, this officer was none other than Carl Gabriel. However, these claims were later retracted and their credibility was questioned. Despite this, some still believe that Carl fled to Russia after the war and returned to take his revenge. If Carl Gabriel were truly alive, how far would he have gone? What could have driven him to commit such a brutal murder? Or was all this merely a legend that emerged after the war? The truth is, it is still unknown whether Carl Gabriel survived the war. Even if he were alive, there is no concrete evidence linking him to the Hinterkaifeck murders. Yet, this name, lurking in the shadows, leaves behind endless questions and an unsolved mystery. In the dark history of Hinterkaifeck, was Carl Gabriel a ghostly figure, or a killer in pursuit of revenge? In that horrific massacre, a family's life was darkened, but the real question was, who was the killer? Years later, one man's name kept coming up: Lorenz Schlittenbauer. Was he the perpetrator of these brutal murders? Schlittenbauer had a relationship with Viktoria Gabriel shortly after his first wife's death in 1918. There were strong allegations that he was Josef's father. Josef's birth certificate contained the initials LS, but these initials could also have been those of the doctor. After the murders, Schlittenbauer's behavior only increased the suspicions. That night, when the bodies were found, all the doors were locked. Schlittenbauer easily opened the front door with a key and entered the house alone. No one could understand why Schlittenbauer would enter the house alone when it was unknown whether the killer was still inside under such dangerous circumstances. Schlittenbauer explained this by saying he was looking for his son. Before the massacre, keys had gone missing from the house, which further increased suspicions. As the investigation progressed, Schlittenbauer's strange actions and statements became even more confusing. Years later, in 1925, a teacher saw Schlittenbauer visiting the ruins of the destroyed Hinterkaifeck. Schlittenbauer had said that someone wanted to bury his family in the barns, but couldn't due to the frozen ground. At that moment, some thought this was a detail only the killer would know. According to some, Viktoria demanding financial support for her son might have angered Schlittenbauer, leading him to slaughter the entire family. However, before his death in 1941, Schlittenbauer sued those claiming he was the Hinterkaifeck killer for defamation and won. Yet, these lawsuits did not dispel the suspicions that Schlittenbauer was hiding the truth about the murders. Was Schlittenbauer just a neighbor? Or had he woven the dark secrets of Hinterkaifeck with his own hands? We still don't know who the killer was, but Lorenz Schlittenbauer's name is questioned more with each passing year. What was Schlittenbauer's role in that dark night at Hinterkaifeck? April 9th, 1922. A horrific murder was committed at Hinterkaifeck. In this case, the names of the Gump brothers were frequently mentioned. It was alleged that Adolf Gump had a relationship with Viktoria Gabriel. These rumors were so strong that Inspector Reingruber had to interrogate Adolf regarding the murders. However, there was no evidence. This was just the beginning. Adolf's past connected him to this massacre. In Silesia, Adolf Gump had been accused of killing 9 villagers. Considering this history, Inspector Reingruber could not ignore Adolf's possible involvement in the Hinterkaifeck murders. In March 1922, he ordered an investigation and began tracking Adolf's movements. Years later, in 1951, prosecutor Andreas Popp began questioning Adolf's brother, Anton Gump. However, even more chilling was the deathbed confession of Anton's sister, Crescentia Meyer. Meyer claimed that Adolf and Anton had committed the murders at Hinterkaifeck. Were the Gump brothers really the killers? Anton was shortly thereafter arrested by the police, but Adolf had died in 1944. Anton stated that he had not committed the murders and that his sister's confession was false. In 1954, no evidence was found linking Anton to the crime, and the case was dismissed. But what was the truth? Could the silence of the Gump brothers complete the puzzle in Hinterkaifeck's dark past? Adolf and Anton Gump. Could they really be the perpetrators of the horrifying murders at Hinterkaifeck? This gloomy farm has been remembered for years with a horrific secret. But perhaps one of the bearers of this secret was an unexpected name: Peter Weber. In the winter of 1919 to 1920, Weber and Josef Betz worked together as laborers on a farm. They shared the same room. According to Betz, Weber had spoken about a remote farm called Hinterkaifeck. Years later, in his testimony, Betz stated that Weber had once talked about Hinterkaifeck, but this was no ordinary story. Weber claimed that only an old couple lived there, and that he was aware of the family's darkest secret. He knew about the incestuous relationship between Gruber and his daughter. This secret turned into a chilling proposition. According to Betz's testimony, Weber had suggested killing the old man. There was one goal: to get the family's money. When Betz rejected Weber's proposal, Weber stopped talking about it. But a question began to swirl in Betz's mind. Was Weber just an ordinary worker, or was he the dark figure behind the Hinterkaifeck murders? The gruesome murders on the gloomy grounds of Hinterkaifeck have remained an unsolved mystery for years. Amidst successive suspects, dark secrets, and contradictory statements, the identity of the real killer remains unknown. The family was brutally murdered one by one, with the killer leaving no trace behind. Incredibly, even immediately after the murders, there were still doubts about whether the killer was still in that house. Viktoria Gabriel's forbidden relationship, Lorenz Schlittenbauer's suspicious behavior, the dark past of the Gump brothers, and Peter Weber's mysterious proposals. All of these have only muddled the secrets behind these murders further. Unfortunately, none of these theories have provided enough evidence to reveal the killer's true identity. Who do you think the killer was? Until we meet again in another video, goodbye.